Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We are finishing the second part of our March mailbag here, Gavin. Yes, we did blow the mailbag card early, but I think we've got some really good questions to finish up this version of the mailbag.
We start off talking about our ideal lineups, both starters and bench next season. Then we look at point guard targets for the Knicks. We put together an expansive list who can fill that role finally. And then we answer a big question about RJ Barrett. Did some of the ways that the Knicks limit him actually make him a better player? So all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen every day. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or whether you've made the leap to YouTube with us and want to see our smiling or sometimes frowning faces every day, that's always a blast. And I'm sure we're very expressive, and you could take some very embarrassing screen captures of our faces if you wanted to. But at any rate, I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. I am joined, as always, by Gavin Shaw, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And we are finishing up this week's mailbag, perhaps this month's. I don't know. Maybe we'll flex in an extra mailbag this month because there's not a lot to talk about right now with the way the Knicks have been playing. So this has been like our lifeblood, getting to talk about something different, talk about the things you guys are interested in hearing about. If you're ever just thinking of something too, by the way, feel free to hit us up at Locked On Knicks and just send us what's on your mind, whether through a DM or through a tweet or whatever. We'd love to hear it, and we love just addressing that stuff on the show. But this question, Gavin, to lead this one off, this is going to probably take up our first two segments. This is a big question. Comes from James at jspoon021 on Twitter. What is your ideal lineup going into next year? Could include trades or free agency, but what would you like to realistically see, and who is coaching that team? So I'll throw it to you first, Gavin.
Sure. I went with Johnny Bryant as my head coach. Probably could have done like a little deeper dive. I wouldn't mind, certainly, if Kenny Atkinson came in. I think he would be a fantastic option. But Johnny Bryant seems like the dude who I mean, given his track record with guard development, I mean, given I think his relationship with Donovan Mitchell would allegedly play a big factor in that. But I don't think people should get it wrong. Like he's just a fantastic developmental coach on his own merits, and that is what the Knicks most need right now. So I chose not to overthink it, and I just went with Johnny Bryant. As far as my lineup, it all starts with Jalen Brunson, right? The Knicks, more than anything else, need to solidify the point guard position. Jalen Brunson, within the realm of this question, the best realistic option. He is the best realistic option for the New York Knicks. We did a fantastic podcast with Lauren Gunn, who covers the Mavericks earlier this year. You should go check that out if you want to learn a little bit more about Brunson. But suffice it to say, hyper-efficient player, fantastic around the rim, really good three-point shooter, strong defender, just a savvy manager of a basketball game, and someone who we've talked again and again about player development on this podcast and what types of point guards and what types of free agents are conducive to player development. I think Jalen Brunson would be a fantastic boon to just about everyone on this Knicks roster. So that's where I start with him. Then the rest of my starting lineup is Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, and then here's your first surprise. No Julius Randle. I'm sending Julius Randle to Dallas in a double sign-in trade for Jalen Brunson. I can explain why in a second, or I'll just say I don't really think Randle serves a significant purpose on this team anymore. And even when he's playing well, I think I don't really see a world where he is an ideal complementary piece to RJ Barrett. So he's been jettisoned for Bobby Portis, who is not nearly as good of a player as Julius Randle, but has turned himself into just a fantastic three-point shooter. I think hovering right around 42% as of recording time. And I think that is exactly what this Knicks team need, is just a whole lot of spacing around RJ. They will be getting that. And then I have Nerlens Noel at center because they had to give up Mitchell Robinson to make room for Portis and some of the other guys that they had. Then my bench is Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin, just a highly efficient scorer, very creative around the rim, a whole lot of hesitations and like fakes in his drives. I wish I'd watched a lot more of him so I could give you guys a better picture on Johnny Davis. But I like the general outline of like a very crafty wing that the Knicks had in the draft. Cam Reddish playing a much more significant role. Alec Burks is back just to provide some wing depth. Emmanuel Quickly, Obi Toppin, Jericho Sims, Deuce McBride, Rokas Yakubaitis coming over from Europe. Derrick Rose is here. And of course, to finish up my roster, the Knicks find a way, maybe in that doubles. I can't, is Frank Ntilikina, I'm spoiling it, but is he a free agent, Alex? I didn't even look. Or is he someone they'd have to trade for?
I'm fairly certain he was only signed to a 1-year deal. So I think that he can,
all right.
he can
the
get
Knicks,
signed.
As a human victory cigar, the Knicks bring back Frank Ntilikina as their 15th man. Who knows? Maybe he develops into the best player on the team. But it would not be my dream Knicks roster without Frank coming back. It's kind of like the episode of The Office where Michael goes to get Ryan back, and he's like working at a bowling alley, and he's just like, "Oh, come on, man! Like, come in, join us." That's what we're doing with Frank. So that's my roster.
What's really sad is that his bowling alley has been playing probably the most significant role he's played in his whole career for Dallas because the Knicks were just that poor to him as a player.
It's not a perfect analogy, but anyway, we're getting the band back together.
Yeah. I like that. I love that part of the equation. I will ask you this. I'm kind of curious. Yeah. Like, do you think are you that out on Julius Randle at this point? Did you think, just using him as, I mean, look, I like Jalen Brunson a lot. I think that he's spoiler alert going to end up on my team in this too, on my ideal lineup for next year as well. But I mean, are you that in on, is it that you're that in on Brunson that you would do that deal? Or is it that you're that out on Randle that you essentially just want to dangle him out there and just be like, I'd rather just give up Randle, even if it's slightly an overpay, just for like addition by subtraction? Or do you think that they are like roughly equal in value at this point?
So I do think they're roughly equal in value, but I also could have, I think, like, I can't remember if you did this exactly, but I also could have constructed a scenario where they do that same deal for Mitchell Robinson instead. The reason I included Randle is just because I can't watch any more Knicks basketball with two bigs that can't shoot. And Julius, like, as incredible of a shooter as he was last year, 6 of the 7 years of his career now, he's been a crappy 3-point shooter. So I just got to assume that that's who he is. And maybe the Knicks trade him somewhere else and he bounces back and he turns into a 36%, 37% guy from 3. And this looks dumb and this looks short-sighted. But by and large, he has not been that guy as a shooter. And unless the Knicks like want to go out and find that mythical stretch 5, maybe it's Mo Bamba, maybe they find a way to trade for Miles Turner with Isaiah Jackson emerging in Indiana. Like there are certainly options on the table there that could make it work with Randle. But I don't know. I'm not feeling it at this point. I don't want to ride the Randle roller coaster anymore. I've ridden it plenty of times. I've thrown up enough. I think I'm just out on it.
So that's fair. That's totally fair. So another question I have looking at yours, how do you feel about your center depth? Considering you have Nerlens Noel starting and his health problems were well documented this year. And then pretty much the only other true center on the roster is Jericho Sims. Like, would you consider in this scenario, I'm assuming you as your own version of Leon Rose, know that Mitch is basically 1 foot out the door. Would you consider then on draft night using that pick on a player like Jalen Duren instead and going with, more of a pure center and a guy with like that higher upside probably than a Sims is going to give you, even if Sims manages to improve enough to overtake Noel at some point during the season, and just to give you more depth in general?
Yeah, I think that's probably the more prudent move. I just, again, from what I've like heard and watched in limited fashion, like really fell in love with Johnny Davis. And I like the team I'm constructing is like clearly one that's so anathema to like the current Knicks. Like it's all passing and creativity and ball movement and loaded with shooting. And yeah, I'm taking a pretty substantial risk there. Like I think my argument would be that there are just always like run and jump centers that you can kind of like get off the street. Like Damian Jones is, I think, doing really well for Miami this year. Philly just added like a Willie Cauley-Stein. Like not that those guys will get shredded against good teams, to be clear. But I think I'm almost okay on like punting on the center position to some extent. And like maybe like in a pinch, I think Portis, though he's a pretty horrible rim protector, he can give you some minutes there as a big stretch 5. Obi can theoretically play a little small ball 5. So I think if I were a GM and I were truly responsible for Knicks basketball, I would probably go your way. I think that's the more prudent direction to take Duren. If I'm constructing Gavin's fun fantasy team, I think I'm good with Johnny Davis today.
All right. Well, if people wanted to maybe, start getting some some presumptive bets in on potential Knicks targets. Where do you think they ought to go this, as this free agency fast approaches?
They want to bet the 26-win over-under on Gavin's fun fantasy team. They can go to BetOnline. Football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information that you so desire. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Alex, I selfishly, I ball hogged that whole first segment. I want to throw it to you. Give me your ideal rotation / roster for next season.
Yeah, it's totally fine because I wanted to hear more about Gavin's fun fantasy team or whatever.
Yeah, it's also operating as a strip club on weekends. It's like hard.
Oh boy, I mean, yeah. Jericho Sims is in pretty good shape. He'll be a star attraction, I guess.
Yeah, that's what replaced Clyde's Wine and Dine.
Oh no, it's Gavin's fun fantasy room.
Yeah, it's really dark. Clyde is just he's gloomy all year long.
Yikes! We've gone to Locked On Knicks After Dark now. Yeah. Let me pull us back from the darkness.
Yeah,
here.
Sure.
So I would go. I would also go Johnny Bryant at coach. It just seems to me like the Knicks have probably earmarked him for this position. It's like he was one of 3 guys that Leon Rose insisted the Tibbs have on his staff, no matter what. They gave him the title of like associate head coach or whatever, like his official like right-hand man, like secondary coach on the team, despite the fact that we've never really seen anything to indicate that he's like the vice president of the coaching, section here. It's always kind of just Tibbs. But I think that's been their plan all along, was maybe to kind of groom Johnny behind Tibbs. And to your point, I mean, he's clearly a great developmental coach, and that's what more would you want out of a team that's going to feature the amount of young players that the Knicks are going to have next year, especially ones that you're going to have to make decisions on sooner than later. So definitely Johnny Bryant, I think, is the right guy to give a shot, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You just don't lock him into like a gigantic long-term contract. Let him kind of earn his keep. And as long as he does, then it's a good move. I'm also with Jalen Brunson on the team. However, I constructed the sign and trade a little different. I said that ultimately you sign and trade Fournier to Dallas for him. Maybe Fournier plus, I don't know, like some second round picks or something, if they're willing to do that. Basically, because I think that the Knicks could, with how Fournier is like resurrecting his value right now, I think that they could realistically even get a couple second round picks for him from some team. When we were talking before the show, you even mentioned like San Antonio is going to have like a ton of cap space. He sort of fits their MO as their type of player, a good shooter. They have a great system in place for like Euro players there. So I think there's a chance that a team like San Antonio, who's not exactly a free agent destination, might say, okay, yeah, we'll give you a couple second round picks for Evan Fournier. So you essentially dangle that in front of Dallas and say, look, right now we don't have cap space, but in 5 minutes we could, if we call up and finish this deal with San Antonio, and then Brunson is ours for nothing to you. And instead we're going to, offer you this deal where you could get Evan Fournier back, who's a good shooter and presumably a good fit with your team. So do you want to take it or do you want to leave it? And I'm assuming that they would probably take it. So that's that. So the Knicks end up with Jalen Brunson. I also like Quentin Grimes and RJ Barrett. I still have Julius Randle. It's not to say that I'm the most, huge believer in Julius or whatever, but I have liked what we've been seeing recently out of him, how he's been playing, how he's been sort of embracing in some ways being RJ's number 2, even if there's been some hiccups there. And I think that if he's willing to keep embracing that role and keep building that way and willing to buy in and play hard for Johnny Bryant, then that's definitely a guy that I'm willing to keep on the team for now.
Can I ask real quick? Are you okay with the defense? Like, what do we make of the defense? Like, because that to me is a big part of it. Like, I think when I think of how this Knicks season has gone wrong, I just think of Julius like screaming at a ref while another team gets a dunk on the other end of the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to see that sort of buy-in from him again. The buy-in was there last year, and it just hasn't been there this year. And I kind of get the feeling that it has something to do with, like with many of the things that Tibbs has just sort of lost this team for one reason or another. So I would just hope that with that infusion of new blood at the coach, that there would be that renewed vigor from Julius in that regard. But, again, I was going to say I'm keeping my options open with him. I'm not going to be married to keeping Julius Randle on the team at this point. And if things look advantageous to trade him, I would certainly stay open to that. But I just think right now, if you would go to trade him this offseason, even if he keeps playing as well as he has recently, all the way through the offseason, I just think the market's not going to be super great compared to what it could be for him. Now, granted, that could bite me in the butt, and his stock could sink even lower. But if it comes down to it, you could just offload him to some team that's willing to take a flyer for basically nothing. But
yeah,
I would re-sign Mitchell Robinson as well. I'm coming back on a 4-year, $60 million-ish contract. I feel comfortable with that. I like what I've seen out of him recently. I think it's time to reward Mitch, give him a new deal. I have Emmanuel Quickly coming back, Obi Toppin coming back, Cam Reddish coming back, Deuce McBride coming back, Rokas Jokubaitis I also have coming over, sign him with his draft rights. Jericho Sims, convert to a regular minimum contract rather than a two-way contract, so definitely keeping him. I had the Knicks taking Shaedon Sharpe out of not quite Kentucky. He's not been able to play with Kentucky this year, and I don't think he's going to get to play at all this season in the NCAA, but will be eligible for the draft. Kind of a mystery man. I get the feeling he's going to be just the Knicks type, though. Committed to Kentucky. He's Canadian. He's got tons of great physical tools. He was supposed to be, he reclassified, and I think he was supposed to be one of the top prospects of next year's class, but decided to reclassify to this year. And then with the lack of tape on him and everything, is kind of, become a mystery man at this point. But I'd be willing to take that chance. He's like a pretty big shooting guard type. It seems like he's got a ton of potential. I'd be lying if I said I knew the most about him yet, but sort of like what you said with Johnny Davis, I think Johnny Davis is more of a safe option. I go with Shaedon Sharpe, who's more the mystery box, but has that like high ceiling, like what we talk about with like, say, Cam Reddish, where if it works out, you might be looking at like a potential star in the making. So I figure take that shot. I also bring back Alec Burks for depth. Derrick Rose stays on the team as well. And then I signed Mo Bamba using an exception. I think that, if you can have a center rotation of Mitch, Jericho Sims, and Mo Bamba, you're always going to have some rim protection out there. In the case of Bamba, he's got a pretty decent three-point shot. He's super, super long. I like what he can do on the defensive end. So I say give him a shot. Sign him on an exception for, I don't know, $4 or $5 million, whatever they could spend on him using that. I think that would be a solid bet to just try a reclamation project. And then I said bring back Lucas Samanic on a two-way deal again. And just for the other two-way deal, just bring in someone from the draft that slips through the cracks. I don't, Walt Perrin gets paid more than I do to figure out who that guy is, but I trust him to find him. Then as far as incumbents that are no longer on this new version of the team, Kemba Walker gets moved, attach a couple seconds to him to get him out. Fournier obviously signed and traded for Brunson. Nerlens, I say just basically trade him for nothing to a team that needs a big. I think some team would do that if you could give up like a top 55 protected second round pick for Nerlens, who will be on an expiring contract next year. Some team will do that. And then Taj, just finally send him off to pasture. Let him live out his retirement, free of Tibbs. He can go off and enjoy the rest of his life somewhere.
You're free now, buddy. Go.
Yeah, you're free. You're free time. And then he like tries to come back. It's like, no. It's like the SpongeBob thing with Mystery the horse. Get out of here, you big dumb animal. Yeah. Just get out. And then it turns out Tibbs walks up and then gets disappointed and walks away.
I can see Tibbs taking over like a team somewhere in like Eastern Europe, and Taj just goes and joins him.
Like those teams are pretty loaded, Yeah. I think like the Israeli league has paid pretty well. Like I think Amari was making a pretty good amount of money over there, so maybe Tibbs goes and coaches there and gets Taj Gibson as his like new superstar. Sure. But anyway, yeah, that's my team. So
yeah.
I
know. I like it. I guess maybe this is like a little bit repetitive since we talked about Randall a bit already, but I guess, do you like the idea of RJ, Randall, Mitch being locked in as, obviously, to your point, they can always bail out of Randall at any point. They could probably like bail out of Mitch at some point. So it's not really locked in, but like, is that enticing to you as the Knicks front court for the next few years? Because I think that's like, when I really think about it, like, I'm just tired of those possessions where RJ is just driving into three dudes. And I went maybe too far in the other direction to push my team away from that, because obviously, to your point, like, you're losing a lot of creation with no Randall. You're losing a lot of rim protection with no Mitch. You're losing all your offensive rebounding with Nerlens in there instead of Mitch. So there's a lot of downsides to the way I'm going. But I think I feel this desperate need, like, oh, this doesn't work. And unless Mitchell Robinson expands his game somehow, and like, he's been in the league for 5 years and he hasn't really done it, or to your point, like, if Julius can like resurrect himself. But I think my counter argument to that was, even if Julius plays harder, that doesn't mean his jumper is going to come back.
Yeah, I just still think that he draws enough attention from defenses that it would still be useful. Even if the jumpers aren't falling as much, he is still getting respected. Maybe not all the time from three anymore. Teams are definitely kind of letting him shoot at this point, but he still gets respected in his spots, I think, and still gets respected as a guy that can break somebody down off the dribble, get into the paint, whatever. And that creates opportunities around the floor, just like RJ creates opportunities around the floor for other guys. So I think at his best, even if the shot only comes back to 33, 34% from three, that's good enough to be fake good at shooting, considering he already has on his resume that he was a 40% shooter once. I mean, guys like Porzingis, for example, will get respected at the 3-point line despite being like a 34% shooter. So I think if he could come back to around that number, and then, on the defensive end too, like, I like what that grouping brings at their best between Mitch and Julius and RJ. I'd feel pretty comfortable with it. I just think that a lot of it comes down to coaching this year. A lot of it comes down to usage. Like, maybe get Julius in some pick and roll scenarios again, and some pick and pops and whatever, because those worked for him earlier this year before the Knicks just abandoned it. Get Mitch in more pure pick and roll situations, and suddenly he'll become a better offensive player. I think there's a lot of things that we just don't see happen with this present version of the team that kind of need to happen more. And if they did, then I think that things could get a lot better for them pretty quick.
Yeah, so quick analogy. I think the best case for that working, even if Julius's jumper doesn't totally come back, look at the Miami Heat and how they've worked on offense this year. They play two quote unquote non-shooting bigs in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, but it works because their backcourt are just like elite shooters, and Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson and PJ Tucker, who's leading the league in 3-point percentage. You would have that all of a sudden. I mean, Jalen Brunson is maybe a notch down from Kyle Lowry. Quentin Grimes one day could get to a Duncan Robinson level. Maybe he's a notch below that. RJ Barrett, probably a notch below PJ Tucker, just because Tucker's leading the NBA in 3-point percentage. But I can see that model working to some extent. If you have three really, really good shooters in the other spots, and again, Julius can nominally hit an open three. And even if you just pivot slightly off of Mitch, like to your point, whether it's a Mo Bamba or the Knicks find a way to get Miles Turner, you somehow add like a decent shooter at the 5. Like I think, interestingly, like the best answer long-term might be the middle ground between our two lineups, where you give up on a Mitch and you keep a Randall, or you give up on a Randall and you keep a Mitch. I think we found something here between our two lineups. But Alex, regardless of who the Knicks get, they're going to have to feed them correctly. And I don't know, if you're an athlete, like what is the best way to improve your game through nutrition?
Yeah, they are going to need to force feed some of these guys Built Bars in the off season to make sure that they're in the best.
Lucas Domančić could probably take like 30 a day.
Yeah, he definitely needs to put on a little bulk, so not as much as Mitch did this past year, but some bulk, a middle ground of bulk. Mm-hmm. And this is the time that maybe even some of the Knicks have been giving up on their New Year's resolution. Certainly not RJ Barrett. And you know what? I've been more like RJ Barrett this year, with my resolution. I'm sticking with it. It's March and it's still happening, because I wanted to eat healthier and I wanted to add more protein into my diet. And that's why I've been eating Built Bars, and I've been sticking with it since the new year. I've also been loving Built Puffs. I don't know if you've tried them yet, but they're the first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. And they're covered in 100% real chocolate, just like all Built Bars are. But what's good about Built Bars is that they're low calorie and they're high protein. So you can replace your fatty, just high calorie, icky candy bars around your house. I know they taste good, but they're terrible for you. You can replace those with Built Bars and not have to, feel all that guilt about eating that high calorie, high fat, everything else candy bar, and instead can just take in 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs with Built Bars, including also 17 whopping grams of protein. You can't do much better than that. So if you want to get some Built Bars for yourself, go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. And Gavin, we are back to get into our final couple questions here. The first one says, this comes from Albert Tirado at Al Schmergo on Twitter. Who are the realistic targets at point guard for the Knicks this offseason? And of those, who do you think are the best fit, or is the best fit? I guess we're picking just one. I think we could just universally say, right, we listed him twice in our ideal lineups for next year. The number one fit and probably realistic option, thanks to his ties to Leon Rose, has to be Jalen Brunson, right?
Yeah, it's easy money. He's the guy that makes this team that really doesn't make sense make a whole lot more sense. I think it's the best way to sum up his value.
Yeah, exactly. So we could just bounce back and forth with some other targets. We put together, well, I think a pretty good list here. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to tell because you don't know who's going to become a shoe-in to re-sign with their teams and all this stuff that comes out, a couple days before free agency or whatever. But I had marked down Tyus Jones. He's been playing really good as a backup guard. I mean, he's been a backup guard basically his whole career, but he's been playing quite well for the Grizzlies this year so far. I mean, I think that he's doing some stuff, and maybe that's a guy that you want to take a chance on at this point in his career and say, hey, are you ready to run a team? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Maybe he just kind of does a timeshare with Derrick Rose or something. But I think he might be worth taking a shot on. And then a guy that
I would describe him as kind of. I would say he's like a poor man's Brunson to me. Like he's the discount version of Brunson. Assist to turnover ratio king. He does a lot of stuff well, and really just doesn't take anything off the table. So I think there's a good case for him.
Yeah, certainly. And then another guy I would say, Colin Sexton. We've definitely talked about him before on the show, and probably not super recently. But he could be a sign and trade target if Cleveland decides they don't want to pay him. I mean, they've obviously played really well without him this year. So it depends on if they're looking at it like, oh, we're really excited to get Sexton back to try to make this good team great. Or if they look at it and say, maybe all those things that we thought about him not sharing the ball enough and whatever were correct. And this team actually does run quite a bit better without him out there. And they look to just kind of sign and trade him, maybe even to a team like the Knicks for something like, maybe they value someone like Fournier and just say, hey, you can't have too much shooting. You can't have too much of that skill set here. So, we'll take Fournier and I don't know, someone else, and just throw someone else in there. It would probably take like Deuce or something like that, which I know is like sacrilege to some people. But, then you could get a potential 20-point per game score at the point guard spot. I have serious doubts about running him out there as a pure point guard because I just don't think that he has the distributor chops. I think that he's very much a scoring guard, and I think Sexton at some point in his career will settle into sort of a Lou Williams role. But at this point in his career, there is some tantalizing upside as far as a scorer there.
Yeah, I mean, he's interesting. And remember the lineup we talked about earlier today, and like our dream like all wing lineup of Grimes, Barrett, Reddish, and you threw Chet Holmgren in there. I won't argue that. But I think that lineup, like if it lacks for anything, it's a little bit of shot creation, and Sexton would bring that to the table. You want a little bit more passing there, but Sexton, he's not. Well, he's at times in his career, like other teams. I mean, that's the whole rub with Sexton, right? Like literally other teams players would mock other guys in the Cavs and say, he's not going to throw you the ball, right? So he'd have to calibrate that correctly, but there's all the talent in the world there. Like Zach Lowe often will say about him, like it's the most disrespected 24-point per game season on good efficiency, especially for a guy under 25 in NBA history. And I'll agree with that. Like that, you don't walk into that. Like the dude is a bucket. So I think if the Knicks sign him nominally with their point guard, eventually add someone a little bit more point guardy at that spot and convert him into just a super talented six man, I think he's an intriguing talent play, maybe more so than a pure point guard play. But moving on, you had Frank Ntilikina in here. We both love that. Obviously, we don't have to say anything more. Goran Dragic. Again, if you were going to go the direction of a Colin Sexton, I'd want to I guess Derrick Rose could be this guy, but assuming Rose is gone for some reason, like Dragic would be maybe the second point guard to sign as like a guy who can sort of just be like the consummate game manager at this point in his career. Still extremely crafty, still has a good shot. I would love. I think this team just for a while now, and I mean we keep saying about Rose, they're just so lacking for that veteran presence at that spot. So whether it's Rose, whether it's someone like Dragic, like I need a dude like that on next year's team.
Yeah, for sure. He's an intriguing option. Also, bring back Frank, obviously. Two very icky names next that people probably don't want to hear, but truth be told, they're options. We got asked, realistic targets at point guard. I mean, they have been linked to the Knicks one way or another, whether you think it's bogus or not. Russell Westbrook and John Wall, the guys that are going to be linked forever as the two guys on like the nigh untradeable contracts that are going to pay them almost $50 million a year, well past their primes. Maybe they're guys the Knicks decide to look at for whatever reason. I doubt it personally. I just think that this front office, but I think that they will be expiring contracts as of next year too. I think the Knicks would probably be more likely to give Wall a look than they would be Westbrook. But either way, pretty large albatrossy, even for a single year contracts, to give a guy $40 million for a single season, 40 plus million, when you don't really know what you're going to get. But, if you think John Wall's got something left in the tank, if you maybe can see him for a workout or something first and he looks spry, maybe a chance worth taking, not one that I would probably take because I feel like that's a potential front office career ender in a James Dolan owned team. And then just another quick name, Ty Washington didn't actually make it into he almost was on my ideal roster earlier in the show, but I wound up going with Sharp instead just for the mystery box. But Kentucky connection, he's really like the only guy that you would maybe consider a point guard in this upcoming draft, even if I think he profiles a little more as a combo guard, but definitely a guy that should probably be available around when the Knicks are going to be picking in the draft. And you got that Kentucky connection. He might have something more than what he's shown in college, and what he's shown in college is actually pretty good too. So definitely a guy worth looking at there.
Yeah, no issues with any of that. I would say quickly on John Wall, the only way you get him is in the Kemba scenario where he gets bought out. But that didn't go well, obviously, this year. Final few guys, Dennis Schroeder, Ricky Rubio, Patty Mills, who is a player option. If not, he would be sort of intriguing as just a pure shooter at that spot. And Markelle Fultz. I think the only one that's vaguely interesting out of those four is Fultz. So Alex, I'll let you comment on that because I know you added him and wanted to touch on him real quick.
Yeah, I'll say with Schroeder too. I mean, I'm not in love with him, but I think the Houston would be keen to do a sign and trade, and that's probably why they picked him up. To be completely honest, is because they want to sign and trade him this upcoming offseason and net a couple little assets for him. So they'd probably be pretty, into that idea if Schroeder wants to come to New York. And then with Fultz, he just came back from injury. It looks like he's playing pretty well, in his first couple games back. So maybe it's a pipe dream to think that he would even be available. But I just wonder if Orlando looks at their situation and says, well, we've drafted Cole Anthony and Jalen Suggs these last two drafts. Like, do we really need a Markelle Fultz, or do we want to try to do something a little different? I guess depending on the offer the Knicks could throw their way, it might cost something like an Obi Toppin or something like that to make that deal happen. If they think that Obi would be sort of like a missing piece to their new young lineup. But that's a stab I might take depending on how Fultz looks the rest of this year. Because I think between a bunch of really bad circumstances, he's never really had a chance to take off in his career. So he might be able to do that. If he looks good the rest of this year and you can get him in a situation like that, or the spotlight might not be great for him like it wasn't in Philly. So New York is like 10 times the spotlight of Philly. So, maybe that's not the best thing either. But Gavin, I think we can move to our last question here. And this one admittedly was a smidge confusing to us. So we sort of tried to parse it. But this comes from Almost Rational Nick fan at Whitaker Lochi on Twitter. Is there an argument that the mismanagement of RJ and lack of on-ball reps could be a good thing if we want to now use him as our primary creator going forward? So the way I took this, Gavin, and maybe you've got a different opinion, but I basically thought that what Lochi was trying to say here was getting all those off-ball skills good for him now as he kind of turns the corner and is being trusted as more of a primary.
Yeah, and I mean, you see it on a night in, night out basis. I mean, his ability to hit relocation threes is really good. I've talked about that a lot, like especially the games where Julius has gotten rolling. He's found himself to be I think, pretty good at very intuitive, I should say, at repositioning himself around Randall and finding the spots on the court, similar to what a Reggie Bullock did a year ago, where Randall can feasibly go to the basketball Randall can feasibly go with the basketball against the grain of the defense. So that's an important skill. As a rookie, he flashed some backdoor cutting. That is not something we've seen from him a ton this year. That's something I'd love for him to add to his game. I mean, especially if the Knicks get someone like a Jalen Brunson, I think that becomes a weapon that's much more operational and feasible to use. The way I took this question to some extent was, and then this is sort of a broader interpretation of what I think he was trying to ask. Has the Knicks sort of crummy developmental environment for RJ, is there a benefit to that? And I would say, yeah, like he's sort of been forged in the fires, right? Like it's not going to be harder for him than trying to burrow his way through a triple team induced by no one respecting Mitch or Julius. And when he's on a team with some shooting, when he's on Gavin's fun fantasy team and Bobby Portis is hitting 57% of his threes and it's a wide open lane, like I think all of a sudden you could see a much more efficient RJ Barrett. And some of the knocks we've had on him throughout his career, I think will naturally get rectified. Like whether the poor finishing was like how much of that was lack of spacing, how much of that was just RJ, it doesn't matter because he's had to work on it in such a tough environment that when it gets easier, I think there's a world where he's at least an average finisher. And if he's an average finisher with the frequency that he gets to the rim, you're talking about an all-star. So I think there is a world where all of the Knicks, if you want to call them mistakes or you want to just call them just what happened, I think there's a world where that's good for RJ.
Yeah, I honestly wish I had more to add, but I think you actually summed it up pretty nicely there. I think that basically sums up my thoughts too. As far as was adding all the off-ball skills beneficial? Absolutely, because the best players in the league are not, some of the most, I guess, overrated players in the league are guys that can't do anything without the ball in their hands.
Russell Westbrook.
Exactly. Like one of the most impressive players in the league in Steph Curry, I think, and not to say that RJ's turning into Steph Curry or something, but I think one of the things that makes Curry so impressive is that he is lethal with or without the ball in his hands and has developed those off-ball skills and put in time to get those. And, we've seen that with guys throughout the years like Ray Allen and stuff like that, where, they could do something with the ball in their hands, but also they're just as deadly without it. And, finding their spots and, getting shots that way. Like, especially I'd say another guy like that, like Reggie Miller back in the day was really great at that. Moving without the ball. Rip Hamilton was really famous for that. So definitely valuable skills for RJ, that he sort of built those over time. And I think those are going to benefit him a ton going forward in his career. And then, like you said, it's been a pretty tough development environment for him. So for him to come out on the other side looking as good as he is now, imagine how good he'll look with a team that's more tailored to cater to his skill sets and a scheme that's more, tailored to cater to his skill sets. So I think there's a very good chance that that's a thing too. But Gavin, unless you have anything to add, I think we could probably wrap up this mailbag edition of Locked On Knicks. So thank you all for listening. We'll be back. I think unless something crazy happens, we're going to forego the Saturday episode for the Friday game. I think even without Booker and Paul, the Knicks are probably about to get smoked. So we'll just wait till Monday and do a double recap in all likelihood, unless something crazy happens, like RJ drops 73 points or something. So until next time, probably next week, thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace out, everybody. Talk to you all soon.